Okay, so in this episode, which is episode number 4 of our DR-Z400E project bike series, I'm going to be picking up where I left off in episode 3, where we started reassembling the engine. So part 2 of the engine assembly is going to cover everything else in the motor. So at the end of it, we'll have the motor fully assembled and ready to go back in the bike. So if you like what I'm doing here, please click that subscribe button, hit the bell, click the like, leave a comment, because that's the only way I have of knowing how well I'm doing. For this project series, I really want to thank Rocky Mountain ATV MC for providing a lot of the parts that were needed for this project. I really appreciate them. I've been buying from Rocky Mountain for years, and it just means a lot to me that they've stepped up and helped out with this particular project for my little channel. So I encourage you guys, if you need anything, go check out Rocky Mountain ATV MC. I don't think there's anybody that rides a dual sport or motocross bike that doesn't know about Rocky Mountain. But at any rate, I just wanted to throw that pitch out there. Let's go ahead and finish building this motor. So now we're going to go ahead and mate these two surfaces together so we have everything we need. Dowel pins are in place. The service manual calls for using Suzuki Bond. If you have Yama Bond or any of those typical sealants, you can use those. I'm using Permatex Aviation for my gasket. It's a liquid sealant. I like this stuff for a couple of reasons. It's very high grade because it's for aviation purposes, but also it doesn't really solidify, it doesn't get hard. So if you have any on the inside of your casing, that doesn't peel loose and get up in your oil. So we have everything in place. I'm just going to go around and put a thin coat of this along the casing. Get everything lined up. So basically the crankshaft and the drive shaft are the only two things that are going to poke through at this point. Get those alignment dowels in place. Let me use my rubber mallet to get that started. So now on this side of the case, I'm able to use my Tusk crank puller installer tool. So got it set up. What we'll do is go ahead and install the collet, and then this adapter goes on here on this part of the crank, and just snug that down. Then the stem of the tool screws onto the collet. Alright, and then the body of the tool, there's an index pin here. You want to get that aligned with the groove in the body of the tool, like so, and then it seats down on the casing. And then there is a nut that goes on top here. I'm just going to put a wrench on here, and then as we start to tighten this, what it's going to do is it's going to pull that camshaft without beating on everything. So now we can just loosen this nut here and go ahead and remove the Tusk tool. Okay, So now with our two sides back together, before I go through and put all the bolts in, I'm just making sure that everything rotates freely. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and put the crankcase bolts back in. So now using my torque wrench, 1/4 inch torque wrench, and this is going to be 11 Newton meters. So we want those dots to line up just like that. There we go. There we go. So that's torqued to 24 Newton meters. Next we'll install the pawl and the little gearing inside there. So these I had kept inside a little bucket of its own because there was so many small parts to this. So we're going to need to reassemble this little piece that goes inside here for the pawls. And there's two screws that do get some blue thread locker to go on there. on the head bolts, you want to make sure that you have your washers on here. So according to the service manual, the torque setting is 25 for the initial torque and 46 for the final. So I dip the threads in and then put a little bit by hand on the washer and then drop the head bolt in place. So that's all 4 of them. I'm going to go ahead and get them started by just by my fingers, just to ensure that nothing's cross-threaded. How hard is it to find a 12 millimeter when you need it? Almost as hard as finding a 10, right? I'm just snugging these down by hand, and then I'll come back in with my torque wrench and take it to the torque settings. So 25 Newton meters to start, and then the final is at 46 Newton meters. So I'm going to start here in this right front, and it's going to be a little challenge to hold this. Alright, there's the first one. I'm going to go diagonal back to this side. Okay, there's that, 25. And we're going to go diagonal across. Okay, there's 25 there. And 25 there. So they're all torqued 25. Now we'll move down to our final of 46. Now the trick is going to be not letting this thing move around on me. Here we go, that was at 46. And that one, there. There we go. We have our head back on the bike cylinder and everything torqued down to factory specs. Okay, so then the next thing you want to do after you get the head bolts tight, you want to go ahead and put these 2 bolts here and the 2 nuts here. Now I'm missing one of these. The owner of the bike had actually taken the head off of it. I didn't. So there's a couple of bolts that I'm missing. I'm going to have to order those and get those in here. But at any rate, these are torqued to 10 Newton meters, and then you come back and torque these to 14. The next thing you want to do, because we'll start putting our cams in, so remove these 2 inspection, or these 2 covers here. This one uses a an M10, and you can pull that out. And then the plug in the top here you want to remove using an M8 hex 8, and by removing that, that's going to allow you to see your top dead center marking. But what you want to do is take a 17 millimeter socket and reach in here and put it on that nut and rotate your engine around until you get your piston at top dead center. There's a T, a small T that'll show up here. And again, I'm going to put a picture up here to show you what that looks like. It's very difficult to see, but you'll get that. Okay, so once you have this, your crank set, your piston set to top dead center, over here on this side, what we're going to do is to install the cams. Now the cams, you have 2 different ones. That's when they came out. Of course, that wasn't on my video because, again, the owner had already removed the head. So we have one marked in for intake, and then you have EX for exhaust. And so these are the exhaust and intake side cams. It's also easy to see because you can see the decompression mechanism here on the exhaust cam, which makes it look different. So now a handy trick, when you're doing this, you want to pull up on this and give you slack, but you want to be careful and not twist the cam chain because that might turn your crank and get you out of top dead center. Before we put these in, at the very least, put some motor oil in these journals here. I liked, and on the tops of the cams, I'm using assembly lube. That just gives it some viscosity, some lubrication when you first start the motor up to keep it from the assembly lube is just thicker, and will give you some lubrication until the oil starts to circulate in the engine. All right, so now when we put our cams in, I'm going to start with the exhaust side first. It might be hard to see here, but that has a 1, 2, a 3 with arrows sticking out. Those are going to be very important. And we're going to line these up with certain pins in the timing chain. But a good way to get started is to go ahead and get your cam in your timing chain. I'm sorry, I keep calling it timing chain, your cam chain. And when you set it in here, just basically get the top of these cam lobes flat. That'll get you really, really close to where you need to be with that chain. The same, and the lobes are pointing forward for the cam, for the exhaust cam, and the lobes will be pointing to the rear for the intake cam. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to work this intake cam in here, but I want to rotate it a bit to where when it sets in its journals, that the top of the lobe is kind of flat. Now you see I'm high here. They're sticking up, so I moved it. And from time to time, check to make sure over here that you're still at top dead center. You don't want to get off of top dead center when you're doing this. And it's easy to do if you're pulling on this cam chain. So there, that's setting pretty flat. That's setting pretty flat. So let's see where we are. So looking at the cams, and I don't know, let me try to throw some light on here with my little Coast work light. On the exhaust cam, you'll see there's a 2 mark with an arrow, if you can see that. Now that is going to be pin 1, okay? So from there you want to count over 15 pins. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So this cam is a little off. It's actually pointing to the 16th. You see the number 3 over here with an arrow is actually pointing to the 16th. So what I want to do is rotate this intake cam back just 1 notch. And that top of that cam is sitting a little more flat now. So now if we look at it again, starting over here, we see our number 2 with the arrows pointing to pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And that number 3 on the intake cam, if you can see that, is pointing directly to pin 15. So our bike is in time at this point. That means that our cam chain and cams are properly positioned. At this point we can go ahead and put the caps on and start putting that part back together. Okay, so at this point, one thing you want to do is to make sure that you have your alignment barrels in the outside here's the 4th one, so I'm going to go ahead and drop it in its appropriate slot back here. So if I tip the motor forward, you might be able to see, but got those in place there. Now, here is the cam journal, the cam retainers or journal caps look like this, and you'll see one is marked in and one is marked EX for exhaust. So you want to make sure you get those in the right locations. Also, you'll notice that inside here, this one is, they have the alignment here for this, for that ring that's on the cam. And I'm going to also put too much assembly lube there on the journal, and it's going to go like this. Okay, so on our camshaft journal caps here, have those in place. Now the 2 bolts that are missing here are part of this guide, the cam chain cover that goes on here. So I'm going to go ahead and get the other 3 are in, and then let's get these set in here. Okay, so I have that, and let's go ahead and make sure we have all these torqued down. So we've got all the bolts in. And these are the 10 Newton meters. I'm going to go diagonally. All right. The intake I had not torqued yet. Okay, so all of those are in place and torque to the OEM factory spec. Okay, so at this point I'm going to go ahead and put the cam chain tensioner back in. Now this is not an OEM cam chain tensioner that was on this bike. This is a third party or aftermarket tensioner. But my Rocky Mountain Tusk head gasket set came with a new gasket for this, so I have applied oil to the head as well as the threads here. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this in. I've backed it out, but typically you just snug it up against the chain and then check it and tension it periodically. Okay. All right, by hand I'm going to run it up against the timing chain or cam chain, get it to where it's snug up here. Not too tight. Then you got a lock nut or jam nut to hold it in place there so it doesn't back off. Okay. Okay, we're coming down to the home stretch here on the engine reassembly, and soon we'll be putting it back in the frame. The last thing I want to do is go ahead and put the valve covers back in. So I have a new Tusk. I've already taken out of the package, but I have a new Tusk valve cover gasket here. And again, as always, the part numbers and links will be in the descriptions below. We don't go ahead and take these off. Now we will be putting some Yamabond, Suzuki Bond, whatever you prefer to use to hold this in place on the bottom of these lobes. Now it comes flat in the package, but you want to turn it up like this and just set it in the groove here in the top of the cover, or on the bottom side of the cover. So I'm just working this in all the way around. This little flap goes in here and that seals around your spark plug. And there we go. Just go around and make sure this is seated all the way around. The service manual calls for using a Suzuki Bond. If you use Yamabond or any of those bike branded sealants, that's fine and dandy. I happen to use the Permagasket Aviation Forma gasket. You use the flavor of sealant that you like best, or a gasket. So you're supposed to apply this to these two little lobes or humps here. Just apply it about a ½ inch off to each side and then all the way around it. Apparently there's a tendency for these to leak here, which is why the service manual calls for you to put a little sealant right there. All right, set that off to the side, and let's go ahead and flip this over and put this on. That side is seated well. This side, you just want to make sure those lobes fit down over. I like to use this little small screwdriver just to go along here and pull out just to make sure it's not pinched or binding there. Okay. So then we start to apply. Now you have two, if you didn't pay attention when you took it off, you have two head cover bolts that are short. They go here and here. These are all torqued initially to 10 Newton meters, and then the final torque is to 14 Newton meters. Then you have two more that look like this. Now the longest one goes in the side of the case over here. This mid-size one goes over here to the right. And then over here on this side is where this guy goes. You just make sure that you have your rubber gaskets on each of these. And these are a 6mm hex. I'm just taking them down to where they bottom out, and they will bottom out. You can't over tighten these to where you crack the head or the cover. They have a shoulder on them. And then I'm coming back with my torque wrench, which is currently set to 10 Newton meters. Snug those up. And then let's bring it on into 14 Newton meters. There's 14. Okay, so they're all torqued down to 14 Newton meters. That's it. Our DR-Z400E motor is back together for the most part. My next step is I'm going to go ahead and get it back in the frame of the bike, and then we'll be doing a few things like adding the sprocket. There's another cross piece that goes on here. And then of course we got our exhaust, and we've got our water or coolant system to attach. All of those things, intake, carb here, all of that I'll do in the frame. Okay, so there you have it. The engine is completely assembled and ready to go back in the frame. So in the next episode, episode number 5, which should be coming out soon, we'll be showing you getting the motor back in the frame and starting to get all the other components of the bike mounted back up and getting this back to where it's looking like a motorcycle again. So if you've missed any of the DR-Z Project Bike series, check out the playlist on my channel. There will be a link to it at the end of this video. Also up in the cards is a link to part 1 of the engine rebuild, where we did the bearings, put the crank in, as well as reassembled the transmission. And then part 2, which we just did, covered everything else. This is Tim Two Wheels, and as always, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.